asymptomatic and COVID positive or symptomatic?
So the only difference is that if the mother is COVID positive and symptomatic, she may not be able to take care of the baby if she's very sick. So that is the only indication for separation of the mother and baby if either the mother is sick or the baby is sick. So, but if the mother is actually mildly symptomatic for COVID, just having a little cough, body ache, then she can take care of her baby. But if the mother is very sick with a COVID pneumonia, then obviously she won't be able to take care of the mother. Also, we should encourage that if the mother and baby are separated for whatever reason, the mother should express her milk, and that same milk can be given to the baby, um, uh, because that will help the baby get breast milk, and it will also keep the milk flowing for the mother.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. I think we have covered in a nutshell a very good amount for the newborn care. Now, sir, just now the baby is big, so we'll tell you about the next session.
Madam, my next question is our routine OPD settings, where in today's scenario with the monsoon-related diseases coming up, suppose we get a child who's been running fever for around 5 to 6 days without any focus. So in such scenarios, when should we suspect COVID? And what is the definition of COVID suspects?
Okay, so actually, if you go to the ICMR definitions, then a COVID suspect is a child who either has an influenza-like illness or has a severe acute respiratory infection, like has fever with breathlessness or cough, or has a family member who has had COVID. So that is the ICMR definition. But as pediatricians, we know that COVID can present in any way. It can also present as fever with no other symptoms, especially the PIMS, pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome, where you can just have fever for 5 to 6 days. So when I would approach a child like this, the first thing I would do is to take the family and contact history. Because, see what the family is, what are the cases of COVID in the neighborhood. Now, if there is some family member who has COVID, then this COVID becomes my first possibility in this child. If somebody in the family had COVID 2 weeks ago, then this child I'm strongly suspecting PIMS. But let us suppose we have a child where none of these things are positive. There's no contact history, nothing. The child also has just fever. So in that situation, I would first like to rule out other causes of fever, because I know that PIMS is uncommon in children, and I also know that COVID in children is usually mildly symptomatic. So my approach would be to do a complete blood count, CRP, blood culture, dengue, malaria, urine, SGOT, SGPT, etc., and try to make a diagnosis. So for example, just 2 days ago, because patients don't like to come, somebody called about a baby 5-month-old who's having fever for 2-3 days, high fever 39, baby active. So we did a Skype consultation. Nobody in the family is positive. They have no mates coming into the house. So obviously here, I said, okay, I thought of a UTI, and we did the basic test and it turned out to be a UTI. So you treat that. So I mean, therefore you really have to think what is the likelihood of COVID, and you try.
Madam,
No, madam, you unmute yourself.
Yeah. 1 minute. So did you hear the last part of what I said?
The last two sentences we could.
Yes, the last sentence.
So what I'm just trying to say is that your decision to do a COVID test will really depend on the contact history, the epidemiologic thing, and whether you can make some other diagnosis. So it's a little different in children as compared to adults. It's a little different in children and adults, because in adults at this time, in the past 3 months, any adult with any acute illness, the first thing you think of is COVID. But that may not be true for children, because children are usually mildly symptomatic or asymptomatic.
Madam, is it possible that fever can come up later in the disease and other symptoms can come up first?
Yes, it's possible. So we often see, I haven't seen too much of pediatric COVID, but in adults, we commonly see that they first start feeling body ache and malaise. And then they have a little bit of sore throat, and then 3-4 days later, they start getting fever. So it is a little different from influenza, where you have fever which comes first and then other symptoms may come 3-4 days later. Here it can happen the other way around also. And you also see patients who have just fever, and then after 3-4 days, other symptoms will come.
Yeah, so in this OPD scenarios where we are seeing, say, children with gastroenteritis like vomiting and loose motions, but there is no associated fever and the loose motions and vomiting is going on for 4-5 days. So does it warrant investigations for COVID?
No, not really, because if this child's family members are all fine and then this child doesn't have fever, nothing else, I would think more in terms of a gastrointestinal infection rather than COVID. But again, if this child has somebody in the family who has COVID and all, because you see, most of these kids will be what, 1 year old, 2 year olds, isn't it? And they would be at home, they are not going out. So you have to look at the family dynamics. Though it is well known that COVID can just present with diarrhea and vomiting and nothing else. Because, see, one more thing which is important is that even if you diagnose COVID in these children, is it really going to change the way you are going to approach the case? In adults, it really makes a difference because you diagnose COVID, you have to isolate that person from the family members and you have to watch them for pneumonia. But in children, most of the times nothing is going to go wrong and the child has been infected from the adults rather than vice versa. So you don't isolate the child. So even that way, it doesn't make too much of a difference. If you mild COVID, you miss in children.
And will these kids who are otherwise fine but are COVID positive, will they be transmitting the disease to adults?
It can happen. So but most of the times what happens is that, of course, they've done viral loads in the babies and adults, and it's the same. But most of the times, the transmission has been known to occur from adults to children rather than vice versa, because the epidemic is such that the schools got closed, daycare got closed, children were not going out to play. So how are they going to get infected first? So it will always be that even though people in their family are asymptomatic, there will be somebody who's a carrier who has given it to the child. But it may change. So after some time, if like the schools start and other things start and children start going out, then it is possible that they may carry the infection back home.
The next question is that the overall incidence of pediatric COVID is around 2 to 2.5%. And but they said that the severity can be high in infants. So how do we explain that when we say that the innate immunity may be better in kids? Now, what is the explanation of this?
Yeah, so see, of course, so first of all, that this is not really very well proven, because this is just on that one Chinese study of 2,000 children where 33% were virologically positive, where they found that children less than 1 year had more severe disease. But there could be many reasons. First of all, we know that children less than 1 year also have lower immunity than older children, because they are not so experienced. That's why you have pneumococcal disease, hip and all having so many consequences. Second, they have not had the occasion to get exposed to various viruses as well. And it is believed that one of the reasons why children have a less severe COVID is because they've got exposed to many viruses and that's why they have immunity. Then, so that may be also one of the reasons why infants may have more severe disease as compared to older children, because somewhere they are midway between an older child and an adult. Of course, their lymphocyte counts are the highest. Their ACE receptors are the most immature. They are less likely to have comorbidities. And another one thing which has been proposed is maybe there is co-infection with other viruses which is not being picked up. But I just want to kind of emphasize here that we shouldn't make parents panic too much, because suppose, they have parents are positive and they have a child who is, let's say, 6 months old. They are very worried about the child, but you should say that though the infant is at higher risk as compared to other older children, still that risk is very low compared to the adults. I would put it in that way. And you don't really need to take any kind of special precautions. You wouldn't want to admit an infant to the hospital just because he's an infant. On the other hand, rather than infant, I would be more careful about children with comorbidities. They are the ones you really have to look after well.
And again, the government advisory had come that senior citizens and children below 10 years should not come out of home. So is it that the incidence again in 10 years old, below 10 years it is quite high? On one side we say that the overall incidence in pediatrics is less. Then why was it advisory that below 10 years the kid should not come out?
Because simply they don't need to come out. Why would a child less than 10 want to go? He is not going to be studying too much. He's not going to be contributing to the house's economy. He is going to go out to play. And at this time of a pandemic, when we have a war-like situation, the government would want, people who don't really need to come out to stay at home. So that is the reason why they are saying that, less than 10 should stay at home, because they can afford to stay at home.
And besides fever and cough cold, what are the other manifestations of COVID that we should look for, especially in our routine pediatric OPDs, like any skin manifestations or neurological manifestations?
Yeah, so one thing is that any acute illness at this time can be COVID, no matter what system it belongs to. Okay, because you know that COVID can affect any part of the body. So that is why, if you have a child who just comes with unexplained drowsiness, also you can think of COVID. If you have a patient who comes with a rash, you can think of COVID. If you have a patient who comes with cold extremities, you think of COVID. Diarrhea, vomiting, you think. So any acute illness can be COVID actually, unless you find some other cause for it. I mean, there's a lot written about rashes, chilblains, urticaria, but I haven't really seen it, and I have not even seen it in adult patients in our practice. I mean, rash, etc. Rash is mainly seen with pediatric multisystem inflammatory syndrome. So that is why in the current epidemic setting, if you have a child coming with fever and rash, like earlier we used to think of dengue, we would think of scrub typhus, we would think of meningococemia, etc., chikungunya. Now we should also include COVID in that, especially pills in that.
Madam, in routine OPDs, is it better to admit mild to moderate symptomatic pediatric patients, or we can continue with home isolation?
Is it for mild to moderate COVID patients or any patients?
No, mild to moderate COVID patients. They are RT-PCR positive.
You should not admit them. They should be at home because the likelihood of complications is very low. And by admitting these patients into hospital, you are also exposing your staff unnecessarily. So, I mean, the only situation where you would advise these children to get admitted is if there is no one to take care of the child. Otherwise, they should be at home because 99.9% of the times they'll get better. So you explain everything. And anyway, in hospital, you're going to do nothing. You won't give any specific drugs. You just give paracetamol. So that can be done at home, and you can explain the parents the danger signs which they need to watch out for.
And the standard isolation should be of around 14 days, or any newer guidelines are there?
No, so basically the isolation guidelines say that in a child who is mildly symptomatic, you would isolate them for 10 days from the day their symptoms start, provided they have recovered. So from the first day of symptoms, 10 days is the time because studies show that the viral virus is not there. On the other hand, if you have a child who was hypoxic, then 14 days or 21 days is the time for which you need to isolate the child because you believe that in such children, the virus takes a longer time to clear. The government also says that in children who have severe disease, you have to do a negative swab before de-isolating them. But I mean, we are not practically doing it. I mean, at least in adults, we are not. We are usually doing a cutoff of 3 weeks as the time by which you can de-isolate them.
And in this case, should we repeat the RT-PCR test?
No. So in mild to moderate disease, you don't need to repeat the RT-PCR test at all. And the RT-PCR test can sometimes be positive for 1 to 2 months also. So there's no point repeating the test. It is just a waste of resources. And it is so difficult to explain to the parents why the PCR test is still positive. No matter how much you will tell them that the baby is non-infectious, they will never understand this concept of live virus and dead virus. So they will continue to isolate the child and deprive the child and all those things. Yes.
And madam, routinely we come across a situation, especially on Friday night or Saturday night, where you get a child with respiratory distress, tachypnea. it comes up at Friday night and we need to hospitalize the child, where getting a COVID test on a weekend is very difficult in our cities. So, what should we do? Should we hospitalize the children without doing the PCR test and treat them?
Yeah.
I mean, how do
So
we do
now,
that? I mean, should we?
yeah. So one thing which you can do is when the child comes to you, you can do at least your preliminary tests like your CBC, your X-ray, etc. And suppose you clearly find that this is a child who has a lobar pneumonia and he has high counts, then you know this is a bacterial pneumonia. So you will anyway send a COVID test for the child, because for all admitted patients you send that. But this is a patient whom you can admit in your hospital and take care. Of course, basic PPE will be there for everyone now. All people who are looking at in the inpatient wards are wearing masks, they're wearing goggles, they're wearing gown and gloves. So that PPE will be there. But on the other hand, if you have a patient who looks very clearly like COVID, for example, he has a fever, he's distressed, there's somebody in the family who has had COVID, you do an X-ray which shows bilateral infiltrates, or if you have access to a CT scan and you do a CT which looks like COVID, then in that case, it would be much better to send this child to a dedicated COVID care center for treatment, hospital which deals with COVID patients, because these children will be looked after better over there and infection control will also be better. So I think a little bit you'll have to judge based on the patient, what it is.
Madam, just patients with chronic diseases, like say diabetes, the leukemias, chronic renal failure, and hepatic diseases, these children are high risk. So, should we proactively do their RT-PCR test in between or some antigen test, even if they are asymptomatic?
No, definitely not. Because you should not, and see, antigen test is not for asymptomatic people at all. And I mean, why would you test these children unless their family members were positive? And then also, as I said, that even if you test that they are positive, are you really going to do anything different? You will not be giving them remdesivir or some antiviral drug, etc. So there's no need to test such children at all. However, it's very important that these children, you counsel the parents that they should follow all the medical advice and everything, they should give them their regular medicines. So this is also not the time to take away inhalers. Like, many times the child has finished 6 months of Budicort. So they say, Abhi hum kam kare kya? So in this COVID pandemic, I tell people not to change their medications, because if the child has an exacerbation at this time and then they come to the hospital, then you won't know whether it's a wheezing exacerbation or COVID. Similarly, if you have a patient on anti-epileptics, this is not the time to withdraw that. Do these things, so that you basically, what you want is to prevent these children from becoming sick, getting exposed to the hospital and then getting infected in return.
Yeah, so for example, we have, say, leukemic patients who are undergoing their chemotherapy cycles. So usually most of the hospitals, they insist on getting the RT-PCR first and then only hospitalizing for the chemotherapy. So
Yes.
is it logical?
So that is, now it depends on whether it is daycare chemotherapy or is it inpatient chemotherapy. So different hospitals have different protocols. Like in our hospital, if you're coming just for daycare chemotherapy, we are not doing the COVID test. But if you're coming as an inpatient, they're doing the COVID test. So the reason why they do this testing is so that they can isolate the patient properly. That is the main reason. And now it is a policy, because many times, you have patients coming in for different reasons and you find that they are COVID positive. So unfortunately, that is mainly not for protection of the patient, but that is protection for the hospital, the other staff and the other patients. That's why this testing is done.
All right. Madam, in this patients who are having mild to moderate COVID positive patients whom we are thinking of isolating them at home, is there any role of medicines like zinc or azithromycin or hydroxychloroquine?
No, so basically now, if you look at all the medicines, let us look at the simple things first. Zinc. I mean, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D. These are the three things which people are proposing.
Yeah.
So, vitamin C, there's no role. The only data is from, a Chinese study where severe COVID, they gave IV vitamin C 12 to 20 grams per day and they found some benefit. Whereas what are we talking about? Lim C tablet 500 milligram a day. How is
Yeah.
that going to help COVID at all? Similarly, zinc also, there's no established role. There was one study which said that if you use HCQ with zinc, the effect of HCQ is potentiated. Similarly, for vitamin D, it's anyway an anti-infective vitamin. So, I mean, I think you can give
Madam, you have unmuted.
is that you can give these drugs, but you don't expect them to do anything. But you have to give something, because if you just tell the parents that give paracetamol and nothing else, they will not like it. Something you have to give, and even if you don't give, they will ask you to give. Because all people have now become graduates of WhatsApp in university. So they will all say ki vitamin D nahi diya, zinc nahi diya, vitamin C nahi diya. So you give it because these are harmless things. As far as drugs are concerned, there is no role of any of the drugs. Hydroxychloroquine, ICMR does not recommend it below 15 years, and even in adults, it's not showing any great benefits. It keeps on changing. Sometimes they say it has benefits, sometimes no benefit. Favipiravir is not approved in children below 18 years. Azithromycin has no role to play. Doxycycline has no role to play. Ivermectin has no role to play. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Madam, in
nothing.
given case,
Yes.
okay. In given cases of COVID positive, RT-PCR positive pediatric patients, are there any predictors as to which kids can go to this pediatric inflammatory syndrome? Who will end up with PIMS? Are there any predictors? Is there any score index? Like in adults, they have this score index in which they can say okay, there is a likelihood of patients going into cytokine storm. Do we have any such indicators in pediatric age group?
No, see, because what happens in PIMS is that the first time when the person gets the infection with COVID, it is usually missed because these children are asymptomatically infected or they have very mild symptoms. So at that time, there is no way of saying whether 2-3 weeks later this child will get PIMS or not. There's no way to say. And when the PIM starts itself, then if the fever is not coming down in 3-4 days and the child is getting a rash and abdominal symptoms, then he's anyway progressing to PIMS. But I think your question is which child will get PIMS after 2 weeks? Nobody can predict that. And in fact, most of the children who got PIMS, it was the first time only that they were diagnosed as COVID, because that previous illness was either asymptomatic or missed completely.
So when this PIMS is picked up, madam, that time the RT-PCR is positive or the antibodies come positive?
Sometimes, you may have an RT-PCR positive. Sometimes you may have just the antibodies positive. Sometimes you may have both positive, and sometimes you may have both negative. So anything is possible. So it's a clinical definition, and as part of the essential criteria, either RT-PCR positive or antibody positive or history of contact with COVID. Now, if you look at Mumbai now, you can have any child who may have been in contact with COVID without knowing about it. That is why you go mainly for the syndromic diagnosis, and you
Yes.
can diagnose PIMS even if the RT-PCR and the antibodies are negative.
Okay. And suppose we have COVID positive patient who was admitted with us and we took 2 days to diagnose that, and then we need to transfer the patient to say tertiary care. So what care you would suggest us to take during the transfer?
So first of all, you have to also decide whether this child needs to go to another hospital or does the child can go home. Because many times, the child is well enough to go home. So that's the first decision you have to make. So it may be safer if the child is just asymptomatic or has mild fever, to even shift the child home. But suppose the child needs transfer to another hospital, then you have to have a dedicated ambulance or the family itself taking the baby in their car, because you can't and you have to disclose to the ambulance attendant that the person has COVID, so that they can take appropriate precautions. So I think, and you have to really arrange for a bed before you send the patient, because it shouldn't be that the child is running from here to there, and not getting a bed.
In this section, I want to ask you one last question. That now there was a recent news that almost 55% of people in slums of Bombay were tested antibody positive. So is it that we are developing herd immunity, or is it too early to say that? And in COVID, what are the chances of a second wave coming up?
Okay, so I know that in slums, at least there must be some element of herd immunity because the number of cases in the slums has declined. And that can only happen because herd immunity has developed. Otherwise, distancing is not possible there. No matter how much they say that we did distancing and all, it's not possible kind of room. So the disease burnt itself out there. But if you look at the data from housing societies, they showed only 15%. So there, I think still there is a scope for more infections to occur. And a lot of this is also dependent on how they sample the population. So in slums, who are the people they tested? Did they take a good random sample, or did they take people who had already symptoms in the past? So obviously their antibodies will come positive. So you may be actually overestimating herd immunity also. So, but just by the fact that our cases are plateauing or in fact coming down tells us that in Mumbai we have achieved a little bit of herd immunity. And the cases might start coming down at any point in time now, as it has happened in other countries. And as far as the second wave is concerned, it is possible that it may happen because that there may be several reasons for that. One reason could be that relaxations will happen, so more people will get infected. So, like for example, if malls open up, local trains open up, or it may be possible that people lose antibodies, or it may also be possible that people who are asymptomatically infected didn't mount an antibody response may get susceptible. So we don't really know what will happen, and you can't really extrapolate the information from other countries to your own country. But at least what I know is that you really don't have many patients who have got infection the second time. The same patient getting a proper COVID infection the second time, we don't have many cases. But I think the cases will definitely come down before they rise again.
Yeah, I think the next question, Arpita.
Yeah. So let's hope for that, man, that cases will come down.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Should I? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, ma'am. Hopefully the cases will come down. But before that, now since the cases are coming down and people are, more and more home quarantine rather than actually getting panicky and going to the healthcare facilities, we are seeing a lot of scenarios where the patient's parents call us. Okay, my father-in-law has been tested positive. My husband has been tested positive. My child so far does not have anything. Somebody is on the day 2 of quarantine. Somebody in the same house is day 6 of quarantine. So actually, ideally, should we test the child and other family members, or actually the child should be tested if there is asymptomatic?
So again, the guidelines say that asymptomatic high-risk contacts of patients should be tested once between 5 to
Yeah.
14 days. But I mean, that's a guideline, but I don't think it makes any kind of really sense to test the child because, it will only increase the anxiety of the parents. So what my advice is generally to test the child if the child becomes symptomatic, even if the child becomes symptomatic and two people or three people in the house have COVID, this child also has COVID now. So, I mean, testing would really matter if you had some specific therapy to offer the child. So, in such a situation, you can also tell them that, look, your child may be having mild COVID. You give symptomatic therapy and watch for danger signs because the treatment really doesn't change so much.
Yeah, because
So,
almost every parent feels thoda cough cold बच्चे को है. Even if they don't have, the other family members are positive, so they always have that inclination towards the.
and sometimes they imagine it. They imagine it. कि
Yeah, that's
इसको
what.
एक दो छींक आया सुबह छींक आया या वो थोड़ा डल बैठा हुआ है या
डल
उसको थोड़े
बैठा
गले
हुआ
में
है.
दर्द हो रहा है. So I would encourage them to test the child if the child is having high fever or something because then you know
Okay.
that you may be dealing with a little serious illness. Then we should test and know what the diagnosis is. But if the child is just having a little bit of sore throat or a little bit of cold and the child is otherwise playing and jumping or the child is asymptomatic, I don't think testing will really change things.
Sometimes they want to shift the child. Once they know that somebody in the family is COVID positive, they either shift the child to the grandparents' house or to somebody else's house. Is it really advisable, ma'am?
No, so this is absolutely not advisable, and we must teach patients one important principle that in COVID, most of the transmission happens in the first 5 days of the illness. In fact, now there are studies to say that if somebody has been exposed to people after their fifth day, they don't get infected. And transmission starts 48 hours before the person actually gets symptoms also. So by the time somebody in the family realizes that they have COVID, there is a good chance that other people have already got infected. So then it is a better idea to quarantine that whole group together in the same house rather than sending the child away, because a child may be asymptomatic positive and going to the grandparents' house may actually be dangerous for the grandparents. So the child may transmit infection. So this is definitely not advised to shift the child somewhere, because you have to counsel them that look, your child may have got infected, and even if the child has got infected, 99.9% do well. You don't have to worry about it. And if you send the child somewhere else, the other person may get infected. And one thing also, you must remember that the secondary attack rate of COVID is not like chickenpox. So in chickenpox, 90% of the family members, if they are susceptible, will get infected. But in COVID, this is only 30%. So nobody knows the reason why. That, why a person in the family and there are four people in the house staying close together in the same room, but not everybody will get infected. The real reason is not known, but it is possible that some people have innate immunity and they just don't get infected. But still, you shouldn't say that उस person को भी घर में सबसे मिलने दो, because अब सबको infection
That's
तो हो
all.
ही गया है. That's also not correct. So you should say, look, you should isolate that person if you have a room and a bathroom, but you don't need to send the people out somewhere,
Yeah, because then they say
especially the child.
the kids run towards their mother. He doesn't stay with their mother. So one question was that if mother, father both are tested positive and child is asymptomatic, is it okay if the child remains with them?
The child should remain with them. The child should remain with them, because you have no way of knowing whether the child is already infected or not, no matter how many RT-PCR tests you do. Because the child can become positive anywhere between day 2 to day 14 of exposure. So if you have done a test and it's positive, you can make sure that the child is infected. But if the test is negative, you can't be sure that the child is not infected. Now, the only exception would be if the child is an immunocompromised child. So, suppose you have parents who are infected, but the child has, let's say, a severe congenital heart disease, has cystic fibrosis, or has leukemia, or has HIV. Those would be the situations where you might want to isolate the child from their parents, because it's possible that transmission of the infection to the child may not have occurred. So, there is a situation where you would want to separate the child, but not otherwise.
And give them the drugs, though it is not effective, but at least we can start them on zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D as a placebo. Or if
You
I
have to start that. You
yeah,
have to start
yeah,
that, otherwise they will eat your brains off. Because
that's true.
you have to start that. Because otherwise they will say कि कुछ नहीं दिया. The most important question, what can I do to boost immunity? That's
Boost
the most
immunity.
common
That's
question
what,
you get.
ma'am. My next
Yeah.
question was that only what drugs should I give to them once the family is positive that, so he doesn't get the COVID from the family members. So,
So, again, you have to tell them that the role of these agents is not proven, but you can give it. And again, you have to be sure that you don't give therapeutic doses of vitamin D, without doing a vitamin D test. And you don't want to do a vitamin D test at this time, send the child for a blood test. So you give the maintenance dose of vitamin D. You can give vitamin C. You can ask them to give the child, a glass of warm water with lemon every day, and they will be very happy with this,
yeah,
because
that's
everybody is everywhere it is circulating that drinking warm water protects against COVID. So you say you give natural vitamin C, they will love it. So that's what I tell you. Give a juice of lemon every day. You give maintenance dose of vitamin D, and you give because some zinc preparation. That's all
my
that you give.
one WhatsApp graduated mother asked me, HCQ can't be given to every child, but chloroquine can be given. So can we use that as a prophylaxis instead of HCQ for babies?
No, even HCQ is safe in children. So I don't know why the ICMR said that you can't give
Yeah.
HCQ to children. But the thing is that we don't know whether it works. So post-exposure prophylaxis, now I think even the BMC is not emphasizing HCQ. Earlier in May, they were saying all family members would give, but now I don't think they are emphasizing on it. So HCQ really, the data in support of HCQ is dwindling with time, so I wouldn't give HCQ to the children at all.
Okay.
Because
Very-
firstly, you
Yeah.
don't know whether it works. Second, it may cause vomiting and gastritis. And third thing is
Any
that
problems?
so that is the reason why you wouldn't give it to children.
Any strong point for counseling the parents? One or two strong points which we can really emphasize to when the family with
See,
the
I think the most important thing which I tell parents is, see, if you are young and healthy and your children are healthy, COVID is not going to give you a problem. In fact, there are other illnesses like dengue, malaria, which may be more dangerous. So the real people you have to focus on are your parents, the elderly. I always move the focus from the child to the parents so that they get the right message, because mostly, though they know that it affects elderly badly, but their concern is most with the child. Even we have healthcare workers coming, they will say ki, of course they'll talk about their parents, but they will say, I have a 1 year child, I have a 2-year-old child. So you have to tell them that COVID, actually nature has designed such that COVID is partial to children.
Okay, that's great, ma'am. Now the
Yeah.
next big will be investigations and pathology, because everybody will say, "हम क्या test करें तो we can be very sure that things will be better." So, sir, will please take up the pathology part.
Yes. Well, now, as far as these tests are concerned, in the first few days of illness, where we are not getting any focus, as we say that we do a CBC, CRP, and wherein the lymphopenia and the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, along with CRP, I mean, how sensitive it is for COVID.
It is not sensitive or specific, because that it is not a good test to diagnose COVID. Okay, so in a patient who is known COVID, if you find lymphopenia, if you find raised neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, you find high CRP, you find high D dimer, then you know that this patient is going to have a severe course. But it is not helpful to diagnose COVID, because there will be other conditions where you will find the same things. So suppose you have a patient with bacterial infection, you'll find high neutrophil count, low lymphocyte count, high CRP. You have a patient with enteric fever, also you'll find the same thing. So that is why what I say is that, like we use CBC, CRP to differential diagnose between illnesses, like to separate dengue from malaria, from enteric, from leptospirosis. These tests are not great for diagnosing COVID. I mean, you can't look at the test and tell you, oh, this might be COVID. So they are more useful
Okay.
if you've already made a diagnosis of COVID. But the advantage of these tests are that they help you diagnose other conditions which look like COVID. Now, suppose you have a count which is 20,000 with predominant polys and high CRP. You know that this is not COVID. You know this is a bacterial infection, either a UTI or a pneumonia or something like that.
So it may be more for prognostication in a given case of proved COVID, right?
Yes.
So which
Yes.
other test can help us for the prognostication in COVID positive patients?
So CBC we've talked about, then CRP high, LDH high, CPK high, then D dimers high, then IL-6 more than 5 to 7 times normal, in a deranged liver enzymes. These would be if these are abnormal, you know that there is a cytokine storm and your outcome may be bad.
I mean, when is the 2D echo and this troponin levels indicated in
Only
other
if you're
conditions of
suspecting PIMS. So you must understand that severe COVID is of two types. One is the severe respiratory COVID, when your patient is having, fever and breathlessness, etc. And the other is the PIMS syndrome. They are both a little different from each other. So if you're suspecting PIMS, then you should always do a TROP eye, and you can do a 2D echo. However, even if you have a patient with a severe COVID pneumonia, you can do TROP, because many patients have coexisted myocarditis. At least in adults, it's known that you may have a cytokine storm in the lungs and you can also have a myocarditis.
Okay, madam, regarding this RT-PCR test, it is a quantitative or a qualitative test, and does it give us any information about the viral load?
So it is a semi-quantitative test. It's neither quantitative nor qualitative because you have a cycle threshold, and the cycle threshold tells you how many cycles the PCR had to run to give the signal. So if the cycle threshold is high, it means the viral load is low. And if the cycle threshold is low, it means the viral load is high. The cutoff is 40. So anything below 20 is supposed to be a high viral load. But again, as I told you, that it also depends on how you have collected the sample. If you've collected the sample very nicely, you may get a low CT value. If you've collected the sample very cursorily, you may have a high CT value. If you've collected the sample in the early part of the illness, you may have a low CT. If you've collected it later, you may have a high CT. So I don't think it really helps you so much in day-to-day practice, except that if your CT value is high, your person is likely to be less infectious. But there is really no great data about the CT. Like, people shouldn't panic. They look at their CT value, it is 14. There's no clear data to suggest that this patient will have a severe COVID unless other risk factors are also present. Because it may just be on when you collected the sample.
And what would be the ideal day for doing this RT-PCR? Which day of illness would you?
I would say 24 to 48 hours from the onset of symptoms. So maybe it's not a very good idea to do it just on the first hour also, but you shouldn't delay it too much, because as you delay, the sensitivity goes down. And fever actually really improves the pickup value, because when we have tested people who are febrile, we've always found that their RT-PCRs generally come positive. So that is why, sometimes the first day your symptoms are very mild. Like, you just have a little bit of body ache, you feel warm. So then I tell these people to isolate themselves immediately. And then maybe by next day, do a PCR test. Because sometimes what you find is that the symptoms are very transient. And nowadays, everybody is so worried about COVID that even if they have a little bit of body ache, now they feel that they are having COVID. So that is why if you wait a day and see whether the symptoms go away or progress, it helps you. So I would say in the first 24 to 48 hours.
Madam, somebody asked that is the RT-PCR test done on saliva, and is it done in Mumbai?
No, it's not done in Mumbai. It has been shown that it is good self-collected specimens, but it is not commercially available in Mumbai as far as to my knowledge.
Yeah. And Madam, can you tell us in short the sensitivity, specificity of all these tests, the RT-PCR and the IgM, IgG antibodies, and whether we should do the ELISA test or rapid test also is okay?
So in RT-PCR, the sensitivity is roughly of 50 to 60% of the nasopharyngeal swab. The oral and nasal swab may be 30%. If you do it in sputum or bronchoalveolar lavage, it is 70 to 90%. That is the rough sensitivity of the RT-PCR. Then you have an antigen test also, antigen card test, where you do it as a point of care test. The sensitivity is quite poor, 10 to 20%, but specificity is very high. So if the test is positive, you know that the person has COVID. If the test is negative, you still run an RT-PCR. And the antibody tests are actually not for diagnosis of acute infection at all, except for PIMS. So these tests are for if you have had a illness 2 weeks ago, which was like COVID, but you didn't test yourself or you tested negative, then you can do an antibody test to see. Or if you have a child presenting with PIMS, you can do an antibody test. And again, the card test is not good in the antibodies. You should not do the card test. We did a validation, it was very poor. So you can do the ECLIA, which is the enzyme-linked chemiluminescence assay, which is from Roche, or you can do the Abbott CLIA test. They are good. And again, the sensitivity depends on how whether was the person symptomatic or not. So in people who have been symptomatic and you do it after 2 weeks, the sensitivity is close to 80 to 90%. And the specificity is very high, about 100%.
And regarding these antibodies, the IgG antibodies, these antibodies and the viral neutralizing antibodies are the same, or there's a difference?
There's a difference. So these antibodies which are picked up in commercial tests are binding antibodies. They are usually either to the S protein or the N or M or E, whereas the neutralizing antibodies are different. But whenever these commercial tests validate these tests, they compare it to the neutralizing antibodies, and usually there's a good correlation. So that means though the test is not a neutralizing antibody based, but it correlates with the presence of neutralizing antibodies. That is why now in convalescent plasma also we do these tests only. We don't do the neutralizing antibody test because that's not commercially available.
All right. Last question on pathology. When should we subject the child to CT test? Does it have any role in pediatric age group or it is more for adult COVID?
So one thing is that suppose you have a child coming to you with fever and respiratory distress, like a weekend you said, and you have to make a quick decision, what are you dealing with? Then you can do a CT test in that setting because it will help you in differentiating between viral and bacterial pneumonia. And in COVID, you see that characteristic subpleural findings. So there it may help you in your treatment decision. But otherwise, there is really no role of doing a CT test for diagnosis of COVID. So, if a child is having fever for 2 days, you won't do a CT test in this child to exclude or rule in COVID because CT is, in children, the sensitivity of the CT is much lower as compared to adults. So, a normal CT does not rule out COVID. So the real situation where you would do CT are four. One is patient coming in with an acute respiratory distress where you want to know what's happening. Two is a patient who is having fever for 5-7 days, a child with cough, but the RT-PCR in the nose is negative. You can do a CT to help you in the diagnosis. The third situation is where you have a child who's running fever, cough, and you want to pick up a occult pneumonia or see what's happening. Like in adults, day 6, day 7, you check and do a CT and you find GGOs. Then you know that this patient may be progressing. So you can do a CT in that situation. But that third situation doesn't commonly arise in children because most children don't really progress as far as COVID is concerned. But suppose you have a leukemic child who comes with fever for 2-3 days and he's having a COVID positive in the throat swab, you can do a CT to know what is the extent of involvement because if he has involvement, then you might want to give specific therapy like remdesivir. So those would be the indications for doing a CT scan.
Yeah, I'm done with all the questions about pathology. Arpita, your next question.
Yeah, ma'am, few now, since almost everything has been covered, few pointers, like if the patient has been admitted, as you said, and turns out to be COVID positive after 2 to 3 days, and we might send the child, as you said, home if he's better, then what care should be taken by the staff and doctors? Should they test themselves or should they be
So
quarantined?
basically now is the era where all staff and doctors should think that every patient is COVID unless proven otherwise. So that is why they have to, like you follow
Okay.
universal precautions, you have to follow the same precautions of wearing your mask and your gloves and gown and doing hand hygiene. So even if you have come in contact with the patient, you don't need to panic. You don't need to isolate yourself from your family members because that's the other question. I have old people at home. I have a child from home. If you have worn
Yeah.
PPE and the patient has worn PPE, and you should test yourself only if you are symptomatic. Because most of these exposures, if the patient has worn a mask and you have worn a mask, are like low risk exposures. So you don't recommend quarantining, neither do you recommend testing. But if you have had a high risk exposure, so for example, you have a person whom you know has found out to have COVID and you were in contact with that person, maybe it was a family member or you had tea together or food together and you weren't wearing masks. So that is like a kind of medium risk exposure. So there, you may want to quarantine yourself because you are a doctor, you don't want to infect your patients. So you would like to quarantine yourself at home and after 7 days test yourself, and if you're negative, get back to work. If you're positive, then you isolate yourself further. That is why we are saying that universal masking of the doctor and the patient is very important so that every exposure is a low risk exposure.
Ma'am, any preferred mask? I know it's a very silly questions, but 3-ply N95 with without. Well, now we are getting that fancy mask also, which is covering the cheeks and everything. Or
So I
whichever
feel
is
that walled mask you should not wear because walled mask is basically not protecting others. It's only protecting you. The other is to, in OPD practice, I feel 3-ply surgical mask is good enough because you can wear it for long periods without feeling suffocated. And you can talk easily. If you wear a N95 mask, you keep pulling it down because after some time you just feel very uncomfortable. But it's a personal decision, Many, like I wear a surgical mask and I'm okay with it, but there are people who are very worried and they wear an N95 mask. Then I tell them to wear a surgical mask on top of the N95 so that they don't need to change their N95 every day. So they can just discard the surgical mask and reuse the N95 the next day. At least for 3 to 4 days, they can reuse it.
Arpita,
Yes.
you have
Arpita, unmute yourself.
Arpita, you are still unmuted. Arpita.
Yes.
Better now? Yeah, sorry for the trouble. Yeah. If the healthcare worker is tested positive for IgG antibodies, so does he contribute to herd immunity? And how long is he safe?
So basically, the first thing is that if he's asymptomatic and he's antibody positive, his infection is more than 10 days old. So he's not going to be infectious to anybody. You don't need to do a PCR test in the healthcare worker because he may still be PCR positive and antibody positive. The second thing is that, you can consider deploying these people at the front line because they are better protected than other people. So basically, people who have become antibody positive, but you can't lower their PPE in any way. It's not that now they can work without mask or something. And nobody really knows how long that person is protected. Maybe for a few months, at least 3 to 6 months, but we don't have long-term data about these people. But all I can say is a person who's had symptomatic COVID and has recovered and has antibodies is definitely more protected than a person who is not got COVID. That I can definitely say.
And ma'am, do they run the risk of cytokine storm? If they are IgG positive after a few
So
days?
it depends on how long back they were. Suppose you have a healthcare worker who started having fever on day, let's say 6 days ago, and he goes and doesn't get his RT-PCR done, but he gets his antibody test done, and he may become antibody positive even on the 6th or 7th day. So this person may still be at risk for cytokine storm till 14 days have elapsed from the day of onset of symptoms. But if the person had the fever more than 2 weeks ago and he's antibody positive, then he won't get into a cytokine storm because most of the cytokine storm happens within 2 weeks. That is why we say that people who have had COVID, they need to be watched for 10 to 14 days from the onset of symptoms. And then if they are fine, they are fine.
So ma'am, if these patients are ideal for plasma donation, what is the lowest age where the people can, or the person who is infected with the COVID can donate the plasma?
I think it's 18 years. Males can donate 18 to 60, 55 years is the cutoff. They can donate plasma 4 weeks after they have recovered and their antibodies are positive.
And ma'am, if the patient is hospitalized, what we were talking about, should we use MDI steroids rather than the nebulization in case of respiratory distress if it's required to do so?
Absolutely, we should be shifting to MDI everywhere because the risk of aerosolization is less. But it depends. Suppose you have a child with status asthmaticus, very severe attack, where you can't give Astelin through the MDI, then you will have to use nebulizer. But otherwise, you should switch to MDI even at home and in your clinics. So earlier, doctors would often give nebulization in their clinics to patients coming with an exacerbation. You should not do that any longer. You should change to spacer with inhaler.
Perfect. Ma'am, any role of oral steroids when we should start?
In what?
In case of if the patient is hospitalized, what are the indications for starting the steroids, oral steroids or IV steroids for the respiratory distress in general? For
No.
COVID
So for COVID patient.
yeah.
So again, there is no clarity. If you look at adult guidelines, they say that any patient with COVID, if he gets moderate to severe disease, meaning his saturation drops below 94%, steroid should be started. That's the guideline for adults. But for children, there is no such guideline yet because none of the trials which really looked at COVID included children. So it is still not a standard guideline to give steroids, but I would give it, because that you really have nothing more to offer. So you would give remdesivir with steroids.
Ma'am, can you just tell us the hospitals which are dedicated to the pediatric COVID care? Because, in case if we need it, the
So I think
reference.
SRCC is dedicated. SRCC,
Okay.
Haji Ali, they have COVID beds. Then Vadia has COVID beds. Then Nair has COVID beds. We in our hospital don't have COVID treatment facilities for children, but we are admitting staff, patients, looking them after in the adult COVID ICU only if we have a child with COVID. But we are not proactively admitting them. We have this facility of doing a very rapid COVID PCR called Expert Express. So what happens is that any child who comes to our hospital, we do this expert COVID test, and in an hour we know whether the child is COVID positive or negative. If the child is COVID negative, we admit him to the hospital because now you can safely take care of the child. But if the child is COVID positive, then we usually refer the child elsewhere. So that is also a very good test, which is not commercially available because the cost of the test is more than what the labs can charge for the test. So the labs
Okay.
can only charge 2,500 for the test, whereas the test itself costs the hospital somewhere like 3,000. So we are doing it only for in-house patients to quickly decide about admission.
Ma'am, one common question: any vaccines are offering cross immunity with the, COVID things? There are a lot of talks about
No.
BCG, MR, typhoid vaccine, this thing.
No, no. There is no vaccine where about which there's conclusive data, but all pediatricians should initiate their vaccination services now. They should not, because many times people will call, ki doctor, it's COVID time, should I vaccinate my child or can I delay it by 2 to 3 months? So less than 1 year of age, you cannot delay any of the vaccines. The flu vaccine also you cannot delay. The pneumococcal vaccine you can't delay. The only vaccines which you can delay are maybe the 5 year or the 10-year booster. Those are the vaccines which, if they are very apprehensive, they don't come. But otherwise, you should make all facilities, keep a separate vaccination OPD for children where you don't look after sick children at that time. Make sure that there's enough space in your waiting area, give spaced out appointments, and follow all precautions, but start immunizing children.
One more question, ma'am. In case of tocilizumab is given to the child when he is hospitalized, how long the immune system remains suppressed? How long we should be careful for the child in the next follow-ups also?
I really don't know because for rituximab that this period is for 6 months, but for tocilizumab I'm really not sure. But I think for the next 1 to 2 months you should be careful with such children. And we have seen that in adults also that who receive tocilizumab they are at higher risk for infections later. But how long does that risk last? I'm not very sure. But at least you would be careful in the next 1 to 2 months. But remember that there is no contraindication to giving vaccines in these children because it works in a different way than rituximab because rituximab, destroys your B cells. Whereas tocilizumab is an anti-IL-6 antagonist. So inherently, it does not really, deplete immune cells or something. But problem is that most children who have received tocilizumab have also received steroids. And many times these steroids have been
IVIG.
given for a period of 2 weeks. So therefore, you would avoid live vaccines for at least a month after these children have been given. And most of the times this is in PIMS where this child gets IVIG, the child gets tocilizumab, and the child also gets steroids, pulse steroids. So you have to be careful for the next 1 or 2 months.
Okay. So, and ma'am, in case of IVIG, sometimes we don't do routine vaccination for 3 to 6 months. But in this cases, can we do it after 2 months?
So basically, for IVIG, you can give all killed vaccines with no problem.
Okay.
So you can give killed vaccines, there's no issue. It's only MMR and chickenpox which you can't give for 9 months. That's it. But
Yeah,
all the
8
other
months.
vaccines you can give. Yeah, all the other vaccines you can give.
I think with this singles and doubles, ma'am has already chased the target score. So now let's open to the audience. So if they have any,
There are some audience questions which I would like to ask, ma'am. Somebody asked that a child who has come to us with PIMS, at the time of PIMS, does the child has fever or there is always a past history of fever?
No, there may be no past history because many times that earlier infection may have been asymptomatic. It may have been mild illness or it may be just that the family someone had COVID. So past illness is usually unremarkable.
Somebody asked me about what is the difference in the treatment of severe cases of COVID in between children and adults?
So, first of all, severe COVID in children is a rarity. It's not common. So that is why you don't have clear guidelines like adults. But I mean, you would treat it in the same way because you are not going to get any big trials about this. So you would use steroids, you would use remdesivir, you would use tocilizumab, and you would use convalescent plasma or something. So, it would be in the same way, the severe COVID pneumonia in children.
Yeah, ma'am. Somebody
Then another question.
asked, sorry, sir, that about the role of plasma therapy in children.
Again, there is no real data, even in adults, actually. It is so, if you look at the interventions for severe COVID, for what do you have evidence till now? You have evidence in support of steroids, you have evidence in support of remdesivir, you have possible evidence for tocilizumab and plasma therapy. But what is very important is the timing of these treatments is very important, and that's a message I want to give here. That nowadays we are seeing people using these drugs at the wrong time. So many people are started on oral steroids early on in the illness when they are not hypoxic, and that is actually very detrimental. So you have to be remember that the drugs are important, but the timing of the drugs is also very important. So to come back to the question of the plasma therapy, I don't think there's really any data about plasma therapy being useful in children. And as of now, even in adults, it is controversial, the role. We are using it, but it's still controversial.
Okay. And the question is that in a child who is tested positive, mildly symptomatic and isolated at home, any preventive measures and what monitoring should we do for PIMS?
So again, in children, the temperature monitoring is important and the pulse ox monitoring is important. That's it, but nothing specific.
Okay. The next question is
Respiratory
child had
rate
fever
monitoring, you can tell.
Next question is child had fever for 2 days and loose motions for 4 days. Now the child is asymptomatic. So treatment was given also was symptomatic. Should we do the RT-PCR?
No, not at all. If the child is recovered, because you're not going to change anything here.
Then what are the effect of COVID on survivor's immune system? Any susceptibilities noted in the recovered patients in the last 6 months?
So COVID may not affect the immune system, but the drugs which are used to COVID will affect your immune system because your steroids, tocilizumab and all. So these people generally can come back with secondary bacterial and fungal infections and viral infections. The effect, long-lasting COVID, the effect it has is on the lungs. It causes fibrosis. So that actually causes decline in pulmonary function. And COVID increases the prothrombotic state. So you can have people coming back later with, strokes or MIs or even venous thromboembolism.
Okay. The next question says that is there any correlation or have you seen any case where there has been marked eosinophilia in a case of COVID?
So again, I want to confess that I've not seen many severe COVID in children. We have seen about 250 adults with severe COVID, and we have not seen any clear eosinophilia in these patients. We always look at the differential. The universal thing is they have 90 to 90% neutrophils, 6% lymphocytes, and 1 or 2 eosinophils or monocytes. That's the usual pattern that we see.
And the last question that I can see is there any role of methylene blue in unblocking pulmonary capillaries in a case of severe hypoxia?
No, I mean, you see these things circulating on WhatsApp all the time, but we have never used it. I mean, we've used it maybe once, some intensivist used, but normally, I mean, there's no real role of methylene blue. It is not one of the therapies which we are very enthusiastic about at this time.
Yes, madam.
But heparin is a very heparin is one very important component. Low molecular weight heparin is very important treatment of COVID. So all patients who have moderate to severe COVID who get admitted to the hospital, adults get low molecular weight heparin compulsorily.
Ecosprin? Ecosprin?
No. Ecosprin we give in children with PIMS, but not otherwise in adults.
The next question is, ma'am, after how much period after which we can be assured that PIMS will not occur?
So again, there is nothing like that. Meaning, so this must be a question from a parent whose child had COVID, and now 2 weeks have passed and the child is fine. I don't know the answer, but usually maybe 4 to 6 weeks, I guess.
Okay. Is there any role of low dose radiation as a treatment of COVID?
No, means radiotherapy. I haven't heard about it.
People are using these UV lights nowadays for the
That is for
treatment.
disinfection. That is for
Sure.